I was lying in a suffocating VIP hospital room, still weak from a mild stroke, heartbreaking, as my own children forced a property transfer contract in front of me. Just as my tears of anguish began to fall, the door burst open. A female doctor walked straight to my bed, pulled up the empty chair beside me, and asked softly, "May I stay here with you, Father?" My ungrateful children shot to their feet. The youngest snapped, "Are you insane? Get out!" The doctor slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a horrifying burn scar, and looked them dead in the eyes. "Have you both forgotten the fire from 25 years ago? Thank you for tuning in to Dad's Revenge Stories. I truly appreciate your presence. To help boost our community, comment below with your location or country. Also, please keep in mind that this narrative contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and education. Any resemblance to names or settings is purely coincidental, but the core message remains powerful. How do you measure the moment a father realizes he has been a fool? Not the slow kind of fool, the kind who makes small mistakes over decades and quietly learns from them. I mean the sudden kind. The kind that hits you at 75 years old, flat on your back in a hospital bed with tubes in your arm and your own children standing over you like creditors waiting to collect. That is the question I asked myself on the afternoon of October 14th, 2025, in room 412 of Manhattan General's private wing, while my son Richard set a contract on my bedside tray, as casually as if he were leaving me a get-well card. The room smelled like lilies, white ones. A full arrangement, tall and expensive, sitting in a crystal vase on the windowsill. Richard had brought them. He announced it when he walked in. "Brought you flowers," Dad brightened the place up. And I had nodded and said thank you, because that is what fathers do. It was only later, watching the white petals curl under the fluorescent light, that I remembered my wife Eleanor's funeral. Lilies. White lilies everywhere. The same smell. I had not been able to look at them since. Richard knew that. He had stood in the front row at Eleanor's service. He had watched me press my hand against the casket and promise her I would hold the family together. He knew what white lilies smelled like to me, and he brought them anyway. The legal team went over everything twice, Richard said, adjusting his cufflinks the way he always did when he was performing confidence rather than feeling it. He was 45 years old and had his mother's cheekbones and my stubbornness, though he had aimed both of those things in directions Eleanor never would have recognized. "It's a clean transfer, everything above board. You sign today, we handle the medical bills, the insurance, all of it. You focus on getting better." I looked at the contract. 63 pages. I had built Callaway Group over 40 years real estate development. 3 office towers in Midtown Manhattan. A portfolio that Eleanor and I had constructed from nothing, from a single 2-bedroom apartment we flipped in Queens in 1981 with money borrowed from her father. 63 pages to hand all of it over to a man who had never once asked how I built it. "Richard," I said, and my voice came out thinner than I wanted, roughened by the stroke that had put me here 4 days ago. "I am not signing anything today." His jaw tightened, just slightly, the way it used to when he was 12 years old, and I told him he could not have something. Some things do not change. Diane stepped forward from the corner where she had been standing, 40 years old, her dark hair pulled back tight, her arms crossed over her chest. She had her mother's eyes, but none of Eleanor's warmth in them. She had been quiet when they arrived, which I had learned over the years meant she was calculating. "Dad," she said, and the word landed flat like a stone dropped on concrete rather than water. "You had a stroke. A mild one this time, but the doctors said another one is possible. You can't manage the company from a hospital bed. You can't manage it at all anymore if we're being honest." "Then let's be honest," I said. "Neither of you has ever managed anything larger than your own expense accounts." Richard's expression darkened. He pulled the chair beside my bed close and sat down in it, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, a posture I recognized. It was the posture of a man who had decided that gentleness had failed and was reaching for something harder. "You still have half the estate earmarked for Nora in the old will," he said, dropping his voice low, as though the name were dangerous. "She's been dead for 25 years, Dad. 25 years. You're holding assets in trust for a ghost." The heart monitor beside me ticked steadily. I focused on it. "Don't," I said. "It's not rational," Diane said, her voice sharper now, the calculation surfacing. "It's grief. It's been grief for 25 years, and it has clouded every decision you've made about this family. Sign the papers. Let us restructure. The trust for Nora gets dissolved, the assets consolidate properly, and we move forward." "Move forward," I repeated. "That's right." I looked at my son. He had Eleanor's cheekbones and my stubbornness, and somewhere beneath all of it, buried under years of entitlement and resentment, and wanting more than he had earned, there might have still been the boy who used to fall asleep in my truck on the way home from Little League. I looked for that boy. I could not find him. "If you don't sign," Richard said, and now the performance of civility was entirely gone, stripped away like paint off a wall, "I will contact the board of directors Monday morning and initiate a competency review. I have 2 doctors prepared to testify that your cognitive function is compromised. The VIP insurance package you're on, the one paying for this room, this floor, the round-the-clock monitoring runs through a Callaway Group subsidiary account. I am a majority stakeholder. I can initiate a review of that account. I can make things very uncomfortable for you here very quickly." The room was quiet, except for the monitor and the distant sound of a cart rolling down the hallway outside. I thought about the small device I had tucked behind the framed photograph of Eleanor on the bedside table 3 days ago, the morning after Richard's first visit, when I had felt something shift in the air between us and had recognized it the way an old man recognizes weather. I thought about the way it had been recording since the moment they walked in. "Sign it, old man," Richard said softly. "Nobody's coming to save you." I closed my eyes, and then I heard the door open. The door opened and the air in the room changed. I have lived long enough to know that some moments announce themselves before they arrive. A shift in pressure, a change in the quality of light, the way a room holds its breath before something irreversible happens. 40 years of closing real estate deals in this city had taught me to feel it in my chest before my mind caught up. And in that moment, flat on my back with dried tears still cooling on my face and my son's ultimatum hanging in the air like smoke, I felt it. She was wearing scrubs beneath a white coat, a stethoscope looped around her neck, a surgical mask covering everything below her eyes. She moved the way people move when they have learned to take up exactly as much space as they need, and not 1 inch more precise, unhurried, completely certain of where she was going. She was going to me. Richard turned first. "Excuse me," he said in the voice he used for people he considered beneath him, the same voice he had used on parking valets and hotel concierges for as long as I could remember. "We're in the middle of a private family matter. You can check on him later." The woman did not slow down. Diane stepped sideways, physically blocking the path between the door and my bed. "Did you hear him?" Her voice climbed sharp and fast the way it always did when she felt her control of a situation slipping. "Private. Family. Get out." The woman stepped around her. It was the eyes that told me. Even before she reached the bed, even before she pulled the chair close and sat down beside me, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in the quiet of an empty room, I knew those eyes. dark brown, almost black, with a particular steadiness in them, the kind of steadiness that is not born, but built, assembled piece by piece from years of surviving things that should have broken you. They were Eleanor's eyes. They were my eyes. They were the eyes of the 13-year-old girl I had pulled from the base of a hillside in the dark 25 years ago, her arm burned, and her voice gone, and her whole small body shaking so hard I thought she was coming apart in my hands. My chest cracked open. She reached across the bed rail and took my hand in both of hers. Her fingers were warm, strong. The hands of a surgeon who had spent 15 years learning to be steady when everything around her was falling apart. She held my hand the way you hold something you have traveled a very long distance to find and are not yet ready to believe you are actually holding. She looked at me, and slowly, with the care of someone removing a bandage from an old wound, she reached up and pulled the surgical mask down from her face. Richard made a dismissive sound behind her. "What is this?" I could not speak. The words were somewhere in my throat, tangled up with 30 years of guilt and grief, and the particular ache of a father who made a choice he believed was right, and spent every day since wondering if he was wrong. She leaned closer. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, rough at the edges, the way voices get when they have been carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Can I stay?" she said. "Can I stay here with you?" A breath. Then softer still, like a question she had been holding in her lungs for a quarter century. "Father." The word hit me somewhere below the sternum. I had waited 25 years for that word. I had heard it in dreams so many times that I had stopped trusting myself to know the difference between the dream and the waking. And now it was here in this fluorescent lit room that smelled like lilies and antiseptic, and the stale fear of old men spoken by a woman who had crossed an ocean and built an entire life and still come back. My hand tightened around hers until I felt my knuckles ache. "Nora," I said. Her name tore coming out not because it was hard to say, but because it had been pressed down for so long that releasing it felt like something structural giving way. "I have been waiting for you to walk through that door for 25 years. Diane's voice cracked across the room like a whip. "Are you serious right now?" She came around the foot of the bed, her face flushed deep red, her composure entirely gone. "Dad, you just had a stroke. You don't know what you're saying. You do not know this woman." "He knows exactly who I am," Nora said. She did not raise her voice. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on me steady and sure, as though Diane were whether unpleasant, temporary, ultimately irrelevant. Richard grabbed the back of Nora's chair. "Get up," he said. "Get up right now. I don't know what kind of game you're running, but I will have security remove you from this floor in about 30 seconds if you don't walk out that door yourself." Nora released my hand gently, with the care of someone setting something precious down on a safe surface. Then she stood. She turned to face Richard and Diane with an expression I had never seen on any face in any negotiation in 40 years of business. Not anger, not fear, not the brittle bravado of someone bluffing. Something quieter and more final than any of those things. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Diane's lip curled. "You have no right to be in this room. You have no legal standing, no documentation, nothing. Whatever he said to you, whatever he told you about the will, whatever you think you're entitled to." "I don't want the will," Nora said. That stopped Diane cold. Nora reached up with her right hand and gripped the left sleeve of her white coat. Slowly, deliberately, the way someone moves when they want every person in the room to understand that what is coming cannot be undone, she began to push the fabric up, past her wrist, past her forearm, up toward the elbow where the sleeve ended and the truth began. Richard's face changed first. There are things a father's hands remember that his mind spends years trying to forget. The weight of a 13-year-old girl pulled from the dark at the base of a hillside. The way her arm felt when I wrapped my coat around it, hot and wrong, the skin already pulling tight in ways that skin should never pull. The sound she made when I lifted her, something between a cry and a breath, as if her body could not decide which one it needed more. I had carried that memory in my hands for 25 years, like a burn of my own. Now I watched my daughter push her sleeve past the elbow, and the memory came back so hard it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. Under the fluorescent light of room 412, the scar ran the full length of her left forearm, a ridge of tissue contracted and uneven, pulling the skin into a landscape of silver and pale pink that spoke clearly of a fire survived at terrible cost. It started just above her wrist, widened at the forearm, and climbed past the elbow to where the sleeve of her white coat had been. The room stopped. I do not mean that metaphorically. I mean that Richard, who had not stopped moving or talking or calculating since he walked through the door, went completely still. Diane made a sound in her throat, not a word, something that came before words, the sound a person makes when their body understands something their mind is refusing to process. Nora stood with her arm extended, her sleeve pushed high, and she looked at Richard and Diane the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray clinically, without flinching, reading what is there with the cold precision of someone who has spent 15 years making sense of damage. 25 years ago, she said, her voice even and unhurried. There was a fire in an abandoned building on the east side of the Callaway property in upstate New York. The official report listed the cause as faulty wiring. The building was condemned. Nobody was supposed to be inside. She paused. I was 13 years old, and I was inside because the two of you had locked the door from the outside. Diane's hand shot out and grabbed the bed rail. Her knuckles went white. I had found your records, Nora continued, her eyes moving between Richard and Diane with the steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this not out of anger, but out of necessity, because the truth told badly can be dismissed, and she had not come this far to be dismissed. Receipts, transfers. Both of you had been skimming from the household accounts for almost 2 years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. I was going to tell Dad. You found out. She lowered her arm slowly. So you locked me in, and you walked away. That is a lie, Richard said. The words came out immediately, too immediately, the way denials come when they have been prepared in advance and kept ready for exactly this moment. But his face told a different story. The color had drained from it entirely, leaving something underneath that I recognized after 45 years of knowing him. Not innocence, not outrage, fear. I used this arm, Nora said, and she raised it again briefly, the scar catching the light, to break through a burning window frame. I fell 8 feet onto a slope and I rolled to the bottom of the hill, and that is where our father found me. She looked at me then, and for just a moment, the clinical steadiness cracked open, and I saw the girl inside the woman shaking and burned and alive. He found me, and he made a choice that night. He chose to protect me from what he knew would happen if either of you found out I had survived. Diane turned to me, and the fear on her face had curdled into something uglier. You knew, she said. All this time you knew she was alive and you said nothing. I said everything I needed to say. I told her. I said it in a hospital room in Montreal, where I sat beside her for 3 weeks, while she learned to use her hand again. And then I said it again every year, when I watched her become the kind of person neither of you ever came close to being. Richard straightened his jacket. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, the gesture of a man pulling himself back together after a blow. I had seen him do it before. After bad quarterly reports. After deals that fell through. After confrontations he had not won, but refused to admit he had lost. "This is a touching story," he said, and his voice was smooth again. The fear pressed back below the surface where he kept things he did not want examined. "It's also completely unprovable. A scar is not evidence. A story told by a woman who walked in off the street is not a legal claim. Whatever she says happened 25 years ago, whatever you believe about it, none of it changes the facts in front of us today." He picked up the contract from my tray and held it up. "This is what matters. Paper, signatures, law. And right now the law says this company belongs to the man in that bed, and the man in that bed needs to sign it over before his competency becomes a matter of public record." Diane had recovered herself as well, though not as cleanly as Richard. She grabbed her bag from the chair by the window. "We'll give you some time to think," she said, the mocking warmth back in her voice like a coat she had put back on. "But don't take too long, Dad. The board meeting is Friday." They moved toward the door together. Richard reached it first. He pushed it open and held it, and as Diane walked through, he turned back one final time and looked at me across the length of the room. It was a long look. I had been in rooms with dangerous people before, men who smiled while they decided what to take from you. Men who shook your hand and were already planning the lawsuit before they reached their car. I knew what that kind of look felt like. This was that kind of look. The door closed behind him. Nora sat back down beside me and took my hand again, and neither of us spoke for a long moment, because some things need space before they can become words. Then she looked toward the closed door and said very quietly, "He's going to do something tonight." "I know," I said. "So am I," she said. After the door closed, the room breathed differently. The particular tension that Richard carried with him, that low-frequency hum of agenda and calculation that I had learned to feel the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, was gone, and what remained in its absence was something I had not experienced in a very long time. Quiet that was not empty. The kind of quiet that exists between two people who have found each other after a long separation and are not yet sure how to begin. Nora was still holding my hand. She was looking at the closed door with an expression I could not fully read. Not quite anger, not quite relief. Something in the territory between the two. The expression of a person who has spent years preparing for a confrontation and is now recalibrating because the confrontation was not exactly what she had prepared for. "How long have you been at this hospital?" I asked her. 3 years, she said. "Chief of trauma surgery. I requested the transfer from Johns Hopkins specifically." She paused. "I wanted to be close enough to act when the time came. I just did not expect the time to come this fast." I looked at her. Really looked at her the way I had not allowed myself to do since she walked through the door, because looking too directly at something you have missed for 25 years can undo you if you are not careful. She had Eleanor's jaw and my brow and a particular way of holding her shoulders that I recognized as entirely her own, something she had built in the years I was not there to watch her build it. "I owe you an explanation," I said. "You owe me 25 years, she said. But she said it without bitterness, which was somehow harder to hear than bitterness would have been. I told her what I had never told anyone. The night I found her at the base of the hill, I had driven up to the property alone because Mrs. Eleanor was at her sister's in Connecticut, and the caretaker had called about a smell of smoke near the old storage building. I had seen the flames from the road. By the time I reached her, she was conscious, but barely her arm destroyed. Her voice gone, her eyes fixed on the sky above her with the particular blankness of a child whose mind has stepped away from a situation the body cannot handle. I had driven her to the emergency room in Montreal myself rather than call an ambulance, because an ambulance would have meant reports, and reports would have meant Richard and Diane knowing she was alive before I had time to think. And I needed time to think. Montreal was far enough that it would not appear in local records, I told her. I paid in cash for the first 2 weeks. When you were stable, I transferred you to a private rehabilitation facility outside the city under a different name. I stopped. The monitor beside me ticked steadily. I told her because I knew that if she knew you were alive, she would want to bring you home. And if you came home, they would try again. Nora absorbed this without speaking. I set up a private account through an attorney in Toronto, I continued. Everything you needed, the surgeries, the rehabilitation, the schooling. When you were accepted to pre-med at McGill, I nearly called you. When you matched at Johns Hopkins for your residency, I sat in this apartment, and I cried for an hour, because your mother would have been so... My voice broke. I pressed my lips together and waited. I watched everything, from a distance. I kept every article, every program, every mention of your name in a medical journal. I have a folder on my computer that is 4 gigabytes of things my daughter has accomplished since she was 13 years old. Nora made a sound beside me, a short, compressed sound that was trying very hard not to become something larger. Why now? She asked when she had it under control. Why did you let me come back now instead of calling me yourself? Because I needed you to be unreachable, I said. If I had called you, Richard would eventually have found out you existed. I have suspected for 2 years that he had access to my private communications. I could not risk it. I needed you to come on your own terms, in your own time, in a way that he could not prepare for. I squeezed her hand. You came exactly when you needed to. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the photograph of Eleanor on the bedside table, the small silver frame, the image of her mother at 40, laughing at something off camera in the backyard of the house in Westchester. Is that why you put the recorder behind her picture? Nora asked quietly. I glanced at the frame. The small device was entirely invisible unless you knew precisely where to look. In New York State, I said, a recording is legal as long as one party to the conversation consents to it. I am a party to every conversation that happens in my room. My attorney explained this to me very carefully when I asked him about it 2 weeks ago. I met her eyes. I did not know exactly when they would come or what they would say, but I knew they would come, and I knew they would say something I would need later. The corner of Nora's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the shape a smile leaves behind after years of being held back. You planned for this, she said. I am a real estate developer, I said. I have been planning contingencies for 40 years. It is the only thing I know how to do well. She laughed, then a real one, short and surprised, and the sound of it in that room hit me somewhere I had not been reached in a very long time. Then her phone vibrated on the bed rail. She picked it up, read the screen, and the laugh left her face as cleanly and completely as if someone had switched off a light. She turned the phone toward me without a word. The message was from an unknown number. 7 words, no punctuation, no greeting. Leave the city tonight, both of you. Nora set the phone face down on the bed rail and did not move for 10 seconds. I counted them. Not because I was calm enough to count, I was not, but because watching her think was the only thing I could do that felt useful, and I had learned over the course of the last 2 hours that watching Nora think was worth paying attention to. She did not panic. She did not spiral. She went somewhere interior and efficient, the way a surgeon goes interior, in the first seconds of an unexpected complication, not away from the problem, but deeper into it, faster than the problem was moving. Someone who knows we're both here sent that, she said. Richard, I said. Maybe. or someone working for him who wanted us scared enough to run. She picked up the phone again and looked at the message. If we run, he wins tonight without having to do anything else. We leave the city he calls the board tomorrow morning, files the competency petition, and by the time we get legal representation organized, he has already restructured the voting shares. She set the phone down again. We are not running. Nora, I have been planning for this for 3 years, she said, and the steadiness in her voice was the kind that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having looked at the fear directly and decided it was not the largest thing in the room. I did not transfer to this hospital. I did not spend 3 years building a case. I did not wait for exactly the right moment to walk through that door so that I could leave town because somebody sent an anonymous text message. She stood up. I need to make 2 calls. The first call lasted 4 minutes. I heard one side of it clipped technical, the language of people who have worked together to communicate in shorthand. Tommy, she said when the line picked up. It's me. I need you at the hospital in 40 minutes. Bring the thermal kit and the cloud relay equipment. Yes, all of it. I'll explain when you get here. A pause. I know what time it is. Bring coffee. She hung up and looked at me. Tommy Reyes. He's 29 years old, and he is the best network security technician I have ever met. I hired him 18 months ago to audit the hospital's cybersecurity infrastructure. He has been helping me with a side project since then. She said it simply without drama, the way she might describe a piece of diagnostic equipment, useful, reliable, already deployed. The second call was shorter. 3 minutes. Ray, she said, it's Nora. I need you to know something is likely happening tonight, and I need you on standby. Another pause longer this time. I know it's late. I know. But you told me 3 years ago that when the day came, you would pick up the phone. The day came, Ray. Pick up the phone. She listened. Then, thank you. I'll send coordinates when I know more. She ended the call and looked at me with an expression that was almost apologetic. Detective Raymond Kowalski, NYPD homicide, now running the Major Crimes Unit out of the 20th Precinct. We met during my 2nd year of residency. He brought a stabbing victim into the ER at 2 in the morning, and I spent 6 hours in surgery keeping the man alive. Ray spent those 6 hours in the waiting room, and when I came out, he said anyone who worked that hard to save a stranger was someone he wanted to know. The corner of her mouth moved. We have been friends for 12 years. I absorbed this, the 12 years of a friendship. I had not been present for the network of people my daughter had assembled in the years I watched from a distance the life she had built out of the wreckage of what Richard and Diane had done to her. She had not just survived. She had prepared. 20 minutes later, she sat across from me with a tablet and walked me through what she needed me to do. Sign a temporary discharge authorization, not a full AMA discharge, which would remove hospital liability entirely, but a supervised temporary release under her medical authority as attending physician with portable monitoring equipment accompanying me and a return scheduled for 8 the following morning. She had already pulled the form. This keeps the hospital's liability intact, she explained, pointing to specific language in the form. You remain technically under my care. The monitoring equipment comes with us. If anything changes with your vitals, I am notified immediately and we return. She looked up from the tablet. It is completely standard for high-risk patients with physician family members. I have done it twice before. I signed where she indicated. Tommy Reyes arrived 37 minutes after the call, young, dark-haired, wearing a jacket that had seen better years and carrying 2 large cases and a thermos. He shook my hand with the directness of someone who did not waste time on small talk and immediately began moving around the room with the focused efficiency of a person who had a specific job to do and intended to do it quickly. Thermal cameras, Nora said to me watching him work. Battery independent, so they function if power goes out or is cut. They transmit continuously to an encrypted cloud server. If anything happens within 40 feet of the building, we have a visual record that cannot be deleted from the source. You installed these before tonight, I said. It was not quite a question. I installed them the morning after Richard's first visit to you 6 weeks ago, she said. At your apartment building, at the hospital parking structure, and at my building. When you told me about the anonymous text tonight, I called Tommy to relocate the equipment from your building to mine. She met my eyes steadily. I have been living as though this night was coming for 3 years, Dad, because I knew it was. We arrived at her apartment on the 14th floor of a building on West 79th Street at 11:40 in the evening. The rooms were clean and spare the apartment of a person who worked long hours and came home to sleep, not to accumulate. Medical journals on the kitchen table. A whiteboard on the study wall covered in notes I could not read from the doorway. One framed photograph on the bookshelf, Eleanor, the same image as the one on my bedside table, which told me Nora had found it somewhere and kept it all these years. She set me up in the guest room with the portable cardiac monitor clipped to my finger and a glass of water on the nightstand. Sleep, she said from the doorway. Nora, sleep, Dad. Her voice softened on the word in a way that undid something in my chest. I will be right here. I closed my eyes. For 2 hours and 14 minutes I slept better than I had in years. Then something pulled me back, not a sound exactly, not yet. Something underneath sound, something my body recognized before my mind did the way the body always knows fire before the mind catches up. I opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was orange. The smell reached me before the color did. Not the sharp, chemical smell of something electrical shorting out. Not the clean smell of wood burning in a fireplace, something heavier and deliberate. The smell of accelerant catching on a surface that was never meant to burn, spreading faster than fire has any right to spread. My body knew it before my eyes fully opened. My body had known this smell for 75 years, had cataloged it somewhere below conscious memory, in the place where the oldest fears live, and it pulled me upright in the bed before my mind had finished waking. The ceiling above this guest room door was orange, not the soft orange of dawn coming through curtains. The hard, pulsing orange of something alive and growing on the other side of a wall, throwing its light through the gap beneath the door, in waves that moved like breathing. I was on my feet before I knew I had decided to stand. The portable cardiac monitor on my finger alarmed a sharp, insistent beeping that I silenced by pulling the clip free and dropping it on the mattress. I did not have time for alarms. I crossed to the door and pressed the back of my hand flat against the wood, the way I had seen done in a safety demonstration 40 years ago at an office building on 6th Avenue, some mandatory training session I had sat through impatiently and never expected to use. The door was hot, not burning yet, hot, which meant the fire was in the hallway or close to it, moving toward us rather than away. Nora. I did not shout. Shouting meant opening your mouth, and the air out there was already wrong. I could feel it at the gap beneath the door, thicker than it should be, carrying the particular weight of smoke that has been building in an enclosed space. Nora. I heard her before I saw her, a sound from the living room, something between a gasp and a word that never finished forming, and then nothing, which was worse than any sound she could have made. I wet the first thing I could find, the towels from the guest bathroom. Both of them shoved under the tap and soaked through in 10 seconds, and I wrapped one around my face and carried the other with me as I moved through the connecting door into the living room. The front door was burning. Not the door itself yet, but the frame around it. The wooden molding Eleanor would have called charming when they built buildings like this on the Upper West Side in 1931 now lit from the bottom up in a line of fire that told me exactly what had happened. Someone had fed accelerant through the gap beneath the door and lit it from the outside. Clean, deliberate. The work of a person who had done this before or had been told precisely how to do it. Nora was standing 6 feet from the burning door. She was not moving. She was wearing the clothes she had fallen asleep in her arms, at her sides, her hands open, her face turned toward the fire, with an expression I had never seen on her before. Not the focused calm of the trauma surgeon, not the controlled steadiness of the woman who had walked into my hospital room and changed everything. Something had gone out of her face. Something had retreated to a place much older and much younger than 38 years old, and what was left standing in front of that burning door was a 13-year-old girl who had already survived this once, and whose body was telling her with every nerve it had that she could not survive it again. Nora. I said her name the way you say a name when you need it to be a rope. She did not turn. The smoke was thickening at the ceiling, rolling in the particular way smoke rolls when it has nowhere to go, building in layers from the top down. We had minutes. Not many. I crossed to her. I put both hands on her shoulders, and I felt her trembling beneath my palms, a deep structural trembling, the kind that comes from the place below thought. I pulled her around to face me. Her eyes were open, but she was not seeing this room. She was seeing another one. 25 years ago, and 100 miles north of here, she was 13 years old, and the door was locked from the outside and nobody was coming. I put my hands on either side of her face. Nora. Her name again. Look at me. Right here. Look at me. Her eyes moved, found mine. 25 years ago, I was too late, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. The smoke was already doing its work, scraping at the back of my throat. I have lived with that every single day since. I am not too late tonight. Do you hear me? I held her face steady. Tonight, I am right here, and I am not going anywhere without you, and I need you to come back to me right now because I am 75 years old and I cannot do this next part alone. Something moved behind her eyes. A flicker. Then a flame of a different kind, the kind that is not destruction, but decision. She grabbed my wrist. The balcony, she said. Her voice was wrecked, but her grip was iron. The bedroom balcony, go. We moved together low below the smoke line. The wet towel I had pressed into her hands, covering her face as we crossed the living room toward the bedroom hallway. The fire had reached the interior wall beside the front door, now climbing the paint in thin, bright lines, and the heat of it pressed against the left side of my face like a hand. A section of ceiling molding dropped burning from above the doorway. I stepped in front of it. It caught my left shoulder, a white-hot line of pain that I registered, and then set aside the way you set things aside when there is no time for them. Nora made a sound behind me. I kept moving. The bedroom was cleaner, the fire had not reached it yet, the air still breathable near the floor. Nora crossed to the balcony door in 4 steps, grabbed the handle, threw it open. Cold October air hit us both like a wall, and I had never in my life been so grateful for the cold. She went through first. I followed. We pressed ourselves against the exterior railing 14 floors above West 79th Street. The October wind cutting through our clothes, the sounds of the city below us carrying upward, in the strange clarity that comes after terror, taxi horns, a siren already growing closer, someone's music 2 floors down. Behind us, through the glass of the balcony door, the living room lit up white. The front wall went. The sound of it reached us half a second later. Not the explosion of movies, but something more structural, a deep percussive thud that I felt in my sternum more than heard with my ears, and then a rush of heat that pressed against the glass between us and the interior, like something trying to get out. Nora's hand found mine on the railing. She was shaking. So was I. We held on. Below us on West 79th Street, two police cruisers had already turned the corner, their lights cutting blue and red through the dark, and behind them, moving fast from the direction of Central Park West, a figure in a dark jacket who was not moving like someone drawn by curiosity. He was moving like someone trying to leave. Nora saw him the same moment I did. She already had her phone in her free hand. We stood on that balcony, in the October dark, covered in ash and shaking, and Nora's hands were already moving, not shaking, moving. There is a difference, and in that moment on the 14th floor of a building that was burning behind us, with the sounds of the fire department, finally arriving on the street below, watching my daughter's thumbs work across a phone screen, with the focused precision of a person who had prepared for exactly this contingency, I understood the difference completely. I had thought I knew what she had built in the 25 years I watched from a distance. What I had not understood until this moment was the infrastructure, the depth of the preparation, the particular kind of mind that survives something terrible at 13 and spends the next quarter century making absolutely certain it will never be helpless again. She pulled up the thermal imaging app first. The footage was live and recording 4 cameras, 4 angles, all transmitting to Tommy's cloud server in real time. The balcony camera showed us clearly 2 heat signatures pressed against the railing. The lobby camera showed 3 firefighters moving through the entrance. The rear alley camera, the one Tommy had repositioned along the building's service exit, showed something else entirely. A single heat signature, moving fast, heading south along the alley toward 78th Street, carrying something rectangular across both shoulders, a bag large and uneven, the shape of something that had been full and was now considerably lighter. "Got you," Nora said quietly, and the 2 words carried 25 years of waiting in them. She called Ray before I could say anything. "He's in the rear alley heading south toward 78th, she said the moment the line connected. "Single male carrying a backpack moving at a jog. I have thermal footage from 4 angles with timestamps. The cloud server address is in the secure message I sent you an hour ago. Tommy can give your tech team access in under 3 minutes. A pause. "How close are you?" I could not hear Ray's response, but whatever he said made her exhale through her nose, not relief, exactly, the exhale of a person whose calculation has proven correct. "Back of the alley connects to a service lane behind the parking structure," she said. "If he cuts through there, he comes out on Amsterdam. You'll want someone on Amsterdam." Another pause. "Thank you, Ray." She ended the call and looked at me. A thin line of blood had dried along her left temple, where something had caught her in the scramble through the hallway, and her hair was matted with smoke residue, and she was standing on a 14th floor balcony in October in a thin shirt, and she looked more composed than anyone had any right to look. "He'll have someone on Amsterdam within 4 minutes, she said. Ray had 2 cars already rolling when I called. He was ready. "You told him to be ready," I said. "An hour ago, yes, when I sent the cloud server address." She looked back at the phone. "Tommy's watching the same feed. He'll track if the subject changes direction." Below us on West 79th Street, 2 more FDNY units had pulled up alongside the first, their lights adding to the blue and red already washing the building's facade. A police barrier was going up across the street. Residents from the lower floors were coming out in coats, thrown over pajamas, pulling children carrying dogs. The ordinary disruption of a building that had become someone else's weapon. My shoulder was burning. The place where the ceiling molding had caught me, I had set it aside in the hallway, and it had waited patiently, and now it was making itself known with considerable emphasis. I pressed my palm against it and kept my eyes on the alley feed on Nora's screen. The heat signature reached the end of the alley, turned right, started moving faster. Then it stopped. 3 other heat signatures appeared from the direction of Amsterdam Avenue, moving in a pattern I recognized even on a thermal screen, the particular geometry of people who have planned where they are going to be before the person they are waiting for arrives. The single signature tried to reverse, hit the alley wall, turned left into the parking structure entrance. 2 more signatures were already inside the parking structure. The single signature stopped moving. Nora's phone rang. She picked up on the first ring. Ray. She listened. Then she closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The only 2 seconds in the entire night that she allowed herself to stop. And when she opened them, something had shifted in her face. Not softness exactly. The particular quality of attention that has been held for a very long time just beginning to release. Thank you. What was he carrying? She listened again. How much? A pause. Okay. Hold him. And Ray, run the financial trace on the payment method as soon as your tech unit is ready. I know it's the middle of the night. I know. A brief sound that was almost a laugh. I'll buy the whole unit breakfast. Just run the trace. She ended the call and turned to me. They have him, she said. Rear corner of the parking structure on 78th. He had a backpack with 2 empty fuel containers and a lighter that had been used recently. Ray says his boots smell like accelerant. She paused. He also had a burner phone with a series of encrypted messages that Ray's tech unit is already working on. They believe the payment was made in cryptocurrency through an anonymous social media account. She looked at me steadily. Ray says that in his experience, people who pay for things through anonymous crypto accounts tend to believe that makes them untraceable. He also says that in his experience, they are wrong. The relief I had expected to feel did not come. What came instead was something quieter and more complicated. The particular feeling of a man who has watched something terrible set itself in motion and has watched it be stopped, but who knows that the stopping is only the beginning of what comes next. My phone was in the pocket of the jacket I had grabbed from the guest room, the jacket that now smelled of smoke and had a burn mark along the left shoulder seam. I took it out. 1 name in my contacts. I had been waiting 2 years for the right moment to use it. I pressed call. It rang twice. Arthur. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It's George. I'm sorry for the hour. A pause. I know. I need you to come to Manhattan General at first light. Bring everything you've been keeping in the drawer. Another pause longer. Yes. That drawer. All of it. I looked at Nora, who was watching me with an expression that told me she understood exactly what I was doing. It's time, Arthur. We'll talk in the morning. I ended the call. 14 floors below us, a paramedic unit had pulled alongside the police barrier, and 2 EMTs were looking up at the building, then at their radio, then back up. Nora saw them at the same moment I did. That's our ride, she said. She put her hand on my arm gently, the way she had put her hand on 1,000 patients in 1,000 emergency rooms, with the particular care of someone who has learned that touch can mean the difference between a person holding together and a person coming apart. How's the shoulder, Henny? Manageable, I said. She looked at it with her physician's eyes. It's not manageable, she said. But it will keep until we're inside. She guided me toward the balcony railing and raised her free hand toward the EMTs below. We're going to be okay, Dad. I looked at her, ash in her hair, blood on her temple, the old scar on her arm catching the light from the fire trucks below, and I thought about all the years I had watched her from a distance and told myself I was protecting her. What I understood now, standing on this balcony, with the city spread out below us, and the fire behind us, and Arthur Bloom's phone ringing somewhere in a Brooklyn apartment, was that she had never needed protecting. What she had needed was her father. 25 years late, but here we were. Arthur Bloom arrived at Manhattan General at 6:17 in the morning, carrying a thermos of coffee, a canvas messenger bag, worn soft at the strap from years of daily use, and the expression of a man who has been waiting a very long time to set something down. He was 68 years old, built like someone who had once been athletic, and had traded the athleticism for a different kind of discipline, the kind that sits at a desk for 12 hours and notices everything. He had worked for Callaway Group for 20 years, through 2 recessions, and one near bankruptcy and the death of Eleanor, and the slow restructuring of the company's leadership that had followed it, and in all that time I had never once seen him rattled. He was the kind of man who recorded the date and time on every document he touched, who kept physical backups of digital files, who used the word discrepancy, the way other people used the word wrong, with precision, without drama, and with the clear implication that a discrepancy was not an accident. He shook my hand first, then Nora's, taking in her ash-streaked hair and the butterfly closure someone in the emergency bay had put across the cut on her temple, without commenting on either. He sat down across from us in the family waiting room on the 3rd floor, empty at this hour, except for a night shift nurse eating a sandwich at the far end, and he set the messenger bag on the table between us. "Before I show you what I have," he said, looking at me directly, "I need to tell you something I should have told you 2 years ago. I noticed the first transfer in October of 2021. A wire from a Callaway Group operating account to an LLC registered in Delaware, Meridian Horizon Holdings. The amount was $8,400. He paused. 8,400. Not 8,500, not 9,000. 8,400. Under the reporting threshold, Nora said. Arthur looked at her with something that might, on a less contained face, have been approval. The Bank Secrecy Act requires financial institutions to report any cash transaction over $10,000 to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, he said. 8,400 stays under that threshold. So does 8,700. So does 9,200. He opened the messenger bag and removed a folder thick-tabbed, the kind of organization that takes months to build. Over the following 4 years, 41 separate transfers were made from 6 different Callaway Group subsidiary accounts to Meridian Horizon Holdings, and 2 related LLCs, Blue Ridge Capital Partners and Century Gate Advisors. Every single transfer was between $7,200 and $9,400. Not one of them crossed 10,000. He set the folder on the table. The total across all 3 entities over 4 years is $2,312,000. The fluorescent light in the waiting room hummed above us. I had known Diane was capable of calculation. I had watched her calculate her way through every family dinner, every holiday, every conversation where money was adjacent to the subject. But I had imagined something cruder. Cash-diverted invoices inflated the ordinary financial misbehavior of a person who believed they were entitled to more than they were receiving. This was not that. This was architecture. "Why did you wait?" I asked. My voice came out flat, because the alternative was something I could not afford in a hospital waiting room at 6 in the morning. Arthur set both hands flat on the folder. "Because 1 transfer is a discrepancy," he said. 2 transfers is a pattern. 41 transfers across 3 entities over 4 years is a case. I needed it to be a case before I brought it to you, because if I brought it to you as a discrepancy, Richard would have found out, and Richard would have had it buried before the ink was dry. He met my eyes. I needed it to be something that could not be buried. "Diane," I said, not a question. A reckoning. Arthur nodded once. The transfers were initiated from a workstation registered to Diane's executive access credentials. The authorization codes used on 37 of the 41 transfers match codes that were generated during hours when Richard was demonstrably out of the office: travel records, meeting logs, security badge data. He may have known. But the person who built this structure, who chose the amounts, who set up the three entities at staggered intervals to avoid pattern recognition, that was Diane. I thought about all the times I had looked at Richard when I should have been looking at Diane. All the times I had watched his jaw tighten, and his cufflinks straighten, and his voice drop into threat, and had assigned to him the full weight of what was being done to me. He was the face. He was loud and obvious and easy to watch. She had counted on that. The LLCs, Nora said, leaning forward. She had been listening without moving, her physician's stillness applied to something entirely outside medicine. Are they still active? Meridian Horizon was dissolved in March of this year, Arthur said. Blue Ridge and Sentry Gate are still registered. The assets transferred into them are largely liquid, held in brokerage accounts under the LLC names, recoverable with the right legal action. He looked at me. I have spoken with a forensic accountant and 2 attorneys. Both believe the structuring alone constitutes a federal offense under the Bank Secrecy Act, independent of any state charges. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit has jurisdiction. He reached into the bag again and produced a USB drive, which he set beside the folder. Everything is on here as well, encrypted with a decryption key held by my attorney Kowick to be released to federal authorities upon my instruction or in the event that something happens to me. He said the last part without drama, as a simple logistical fact. I am not a dramatic man, Mr. Calloway, but I have been carrying this for 2 years, and I am aware of what the people who built this structure are capable of. I looked at the folder, at the USB drive, at 20 years of a man's careful, quiet loyalty sitting on a waiting room table in a manila folder and a piece of hardware smaller than my thumb. Arthur, I said. You don't need to say anything, he said. I do, I said. I have been writing you a Christmas card every year for 20 years, and I have never once written anything in it except my name. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Arthur Bloom did not smile easily, but the architecture of one, the small structural shift of a man who has been seen after a long time of being invisible. The cards were sufficient, he said. Nora's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, read the screen, and turned it toward me without a word. Tommy's message was 4 lines. IP trace complete. Order originated from residential address Callaway Estate, Greenwich, CT. Timestamp 1:07 a.m. Cross-referencing crypto wallet. Now preliminary match to credit card registered to R. Callaway. Not final, but strong. Ray has enough for the warrant. Arthur read it over my shoulder. He picked up his thermos, poured coffee into the cap, and held it out to me. The board meeting, he said, is in 3 hours. Ray Kowalski arrived at 7:04 in the morning, looking like a man who had not slept, but had decided that sleep was a problem for another day. He was 44 years old, broad through the shoulders, with the particular kind of tired that settles into the face of someone who has spent 2 decades looking at the worst things people do to each other, and has made a private arrangement with himself about how much of it to carry home. He wore a dark jacket over a collared shirt that had started the day pressed and was no longer, and he moved through the waiting room with the unhurried authority of someone who was used to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence. He shook Nora's hand first. The handshake lasted a beat longer than professional, the handshake of 2 people who have trusted each other across 12 years and several bad nights and were quietly relieved to be in the same room. Then he looked at me. Mr. Calloway, he said, I've been hearing about you for 12 years. I'm sorry it took something like this for us to meet." "So am I said. He sat down, opened a folder of his own thinner than Arthur's, but dense with the particular quality of information that has been verified rather than accumulated, and walked us through what the night had produced. The man in custody was a 31-year-old from the Bronx with 2 prior convictions for breaking and entering and 1 for aggravated assault. His name was not relevant to us. What was relevant was what he had said in the first hour of questioning, before his attorney arrived, which Ray relayed not as a formal statement, but as context, the kind of context that pointed in a direction without yet constituting proof. The man had been contacted through an encrypted messaging application 3 weeks ago by an account that identified itself only as a username. He had been offered $12,000 in cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin transferred through a mixing service designed to obscure the transaction trail to carry out what the instructions described as a controlled fire at a residential address on West 79th Street. The instructions had specified a time window, a method, and had included a detail that Ray said he found particularly notable. The message had specified that the building had a resident physician on the 14th floor who sometimes worked late, and that the timing should account for this. "Someone knew your schedule," Ray said to Nora. "Richard has had access to my hospital scheduling system for 8 months," she said. "He requested it through the hospital administration under the pretense of coordinating my father's care. Administration approved it as a courtesy." Her voice was flat, but her jaw was tight. "I didn't know until 4 weeks ago." Ray nodded, as though this confirmed something he had already suspected. "The cryptocurrency payment is being traced by our financial crimes unit in conjunction with a federal contact. The mixing service used is one we've seen before. It's sophisticated, but it's not impenetrable. Your technician's preliminary trace pointing to a credit card registered to Richard Calloway is consistent with what we're seeing from our end." He paused. "It won't be courtroom ready by this morning, but it will be courtroom ready." "What about the IP address?" Arthur asked. "Confirmed," Ray said. "The messaging account that sent the instructions to our man in custody was accessed from an IP address registered to the Calloway estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, at 1:07 this morning. Richard's residential address." He closed his folder. "That, combined with the physical evidence from the scene and the preliminary financial trace, is sufficient for an arrest warrant on charges of arson, conspiracy, and attempted homicide. I have a judge on call. The warrant will be ready before the board meeting starts." The word homicide landed in the room and stayed there. I had known somewhere beneath everything what last night had been intended to be. Knowing it and hearing it, stated in a detective's careful evidentiary language, were 2 different experiences, and for a moment, the waiting room, the fluorescent light, the distant sound of a cart in the hallway. Arthur's thermos on the table between us felt very far away. Nora put her hand on my arm. "There's something else," Arthur said. He had been waiting, I realized, with the patience of a man who understood that information needed to be delivered in the right sequence. He reached into the messenger bag again and produced a second folder thinner than the first. 3 months ago, I was reviewing the quarterly loan documentation for the Riverside development, the project Richard told you about, in the hospital room, the one with $9 million in personal guarantees in your name. He set the folder open on the table. "The signature on the personal guarantee documents is not yours." I looked at the page he indicated. My name. My signature. Rendered with the kind of precision that did not come from practice but from technology. The slight forward lean of my handwriting, the particular way I crossed the double L in Calloway, the pressure variation that a pen creates and a printer cannot replicate, but that certain AI signature generation tools have learned to approximate with enough sample data to fool a document examiner on first review. This is called AI-generated signature fraud. Arthur said. Sometimes called deep-fake signature. The technology uses a machine learning model trained on multiple samples of a person's authentic signature to generate a new instance that matches the original's characteristics. It has become increasingly common in high-value financial fraud over the last 3 years. He looked at me steadily. Richard had access to 20 years of documents bearing your authentic signature. He had more than enough training data. What does this mean legally? Nora asked. Identity theft under federal law, Ray said without hesitation. Wire fraud if the documents were transmitted electronically, which they were. The loan application was submitted digitally to a private investment fund based in New Jersey. We're talking about a potential sentence of 20 years per count under 18 U.S.C. sections 1028 and 1343. He paused. It also means the $9 million personal liability your father was told he faced does not legally exist. The guarantee was fraudulent. The fund's claim against him is void. I sat with that for a moment. $9 million of threat that Richard had carried into my hospital room like a weapon that he had used to make me feel cornered and indebted and alone, and it had been built entirely from a lie. From a machine learning model trained on my own handwriting, turned against me by my own son. I want the video played at the board meeting, I said. 3 faces looked at me. Before I was admitted to the hospital, I said I recorded a video statement, 47 minutes. A notary public and 2 witnesses were present. It covers the fire 25 years ago, Nora, every decision I made, and my intentions regarding the company and the estate. I looked at Nora. My attorney has it. I instructed him to release it if I showed signs of being coerced. I think last night qualifies. Nora looked at me for a long moment. You made a video, Will, she said. I made a video, Will, I confirmed. She exhaled a long, slow breath that carried something in it I could not entirely name. Then she picked up her phone and called her attorney. While she talked, my own phone lit up on the table. Richard Calloway. Calling. I looked at the screen for 2 full rings. Ray watched me with the expression of a man who had learned not to reach for things that were not his to reach for. I let it ring a 3rd time. Then I picked up, said nothing, and waited. Dad. Richard's voice came through warm and careful, threaded with the particular performance of concern that he had been practicing his entire life. I heard there was a fire at a building near the hospital. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. These things happen in the city, you know how it is. Old buildings, old wiring. A pause perfectly timed. You should think about coming home, Dad. Let us take care of you. I looked at Nora across the table. She was watching me. I ended the call without a word and set the phone face down on the table. Then, for the first time since room 412, I smiled. Margaret Osei arrived at 7:41 carrying a thermos of tea, not coffee tea, which I had forgotten was her preference, in the way you forget the small details of people who have been quietly present in your life for so long, that their presence becomes indistinguishable from the furniture and a notebook that she held against her chest with both arms, the way people hold things they are not yet ready to set down. She was 62 years old, Ghanaian American, built with the solidity of a woman who had been standing on her feet for 40 years and intended to keep standing. She had come to work for me 3 years ago through a home care agency after Eleanor died, and my physician told me I needed consistent monitoring that I was not going to provide for myself. She had shown up on the first Monday in October with a blood pressure cuff, a weekly medication organizer, and the information that she did not tolerate patients who pretended to feel better than they did. I had liked her immediately. I had also, in 3 years of weekly visits and occasional longer stretches, consistently underestimated her. She stopped in the waiting room doorway and looked at me at the bandaging on my shoulder. the smoke residue that the emergency bay had not entirely removed from my hair, the particular quality of exhaustion that comes not from a sleepless night, but from a sleepless night in which several irreversible things occurred. She looked at Nora beside me. She looked at Arthur and Ray across the table. Then she walked in, set the thermos down, pulled a chair close to mine, and sat. "I heard about the fire on the news," she said. "I called the hospital. They told me you had been treated and released." She looked at me with the expression I had come to think of as her clinical face, not cold, but precise, the face of a woman who gathered information before she offered comfort. "Are you all right?" "Better than I should be," I said. She nodded, as though this confirmed her assessment. Then she looked down at the notebook in her lap. It was a composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind, the kind that costs $2 at a drugstore. But it was thick with use, its spine soft and slightly bowed from being opened and closed hundreds of times. Post-it tabs in 3 colors marking sections throughout. "I need to show you something," she said. "I have been trying to decide for 8 months whether showing you this was the right thing to do, or whether it was something you had the right not to know." She looked up at me. "After last night, I believe you need to know." She opened the notebook to the first tabbed section and held it out to me. The handwriting was small, and even each line dated in the upper left corner with the precision of someone who understood that dates would matter later. I read the first entry, October 9th, 2022, and the words reached me the way words reach you when they describe something you lived through but did not fully see at the time. Richard visited at 2:15 in the afternoon. Stated he was there to check on his father's medication schedule. Did not ask about Mr. Calloway's health. Did not speak to Mr. Calloway directly for the first 11 minutes of the visit. Reviewed documents on the kitchen table. I could not see their content. When Mr. Calloway asked what he was looking at, Richard said, "Nothing important, Dad," and changed the subject. Mr. Calloway's blood pressure at 3 p.m. was 147/92, elevated. He said he felt fine. He did not look fine. I stopped reading. "There are more," Margaret said. 106 entries over 3 years. Every visit Richard or Diane made. Every phone call I was present for. Every time one of them left and I took your blood pressure afterward." She paused. "Your blood pressure was elevated after 91 of the 106 visits, Mr. Calloway. 91 out of 106. The waiting room was very quiet around the edges of that number. Ray leaned forward. "Mrs. Osei, was this notebook notarized?" "The notebook itself, no," she said. "But I have been photographing each page with a timestamp and uploading the photographs to a secure cloud account monthly since January of last year. My attorney reviewed the process and confirmed it creates an authenticated digital record admissible in civil proceedings." She looked at Ray steadily. "I am also prepared to testify in person." Ray sat back with the expression of a man whose estimation of a situation has just improved significantly. "Read her one more," Nora said quietly. She was looking at me, not at Margaret, with an expression I could not immediately name, something careful, the expression of a physician who has ordered a test and is waiting to see whether the patient can tolerate the result. Margaret turned to a tabbed section near the middle of the notebook and read without preamble. March 3rd, 2024. Richard visited alone. Diane called during the visit, and they spoke for approximately 20 minutes in the kitchen, while Mr. Calloway sat in the living room. I was in the hallway. I heard Richard say, "These are his exact words. I wrote them immediately after he left. The old man doesn't have another stroke in him. We just have to be patient." After the call ended, Richard returned to the living room. He stayed for 4 more minutes. He told his father he loved him before he left. Mr. Calloway's hands were trembling for approximately 12 minutes after Richard walked out the door. He told me he was cold. The heat was set to 72 degrees. The trembling came for me then, not in my hands, but somewhere deeper in the place below the sternum, where the body keeps the things it cannot say out loud. I pressed my lips together and focused on the fluorescent light above the nursing station across the hall and waited for it to pass. Nora's hand covered mine on the armrest. "The old man doesn't have another stroke in him," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "He said that on March 3rd. "Yes," Margaret said. "And then in October, he put me in a position designed to cause maximum stress." Margaret did not answer. She did not need to. Arthur cleared his throat softly. "The Elder Abuse Statute in New York Penal Law, Section 260, covers emotional abuse and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The financial exploitation is covered by what we've already established. The emotional abuse," he nodded toward the notebook that covers it. "I want this entered into the civil filing," Nora said to no one in particular, already reaching for her phone. "Margaret, my attorney, is going to want to speak with you today. Is that possible?" I cleared my schedule. Margaret said simply, as though she had known this was coming and had prepared accordingly, which I realized looking at her was exactly what had happened. I looked at the notebook in her lap. 106 entries, 3 years, a $2 composition notebook from a drugstore on Broadway that had somehow become the most thorough record of what had been done to me in my own home. "Margaret," I said. She looked at me. "Why did you keep this?" I asked. "You could have. It wasn't your responsibility. It wasn't part of your job." She held my gaze with the directness of a woman who had decided a long time ago that certain things were worth saying plainly. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I have been a caregiver for 40 years. I have worked in hospitals and homes and rehabilitation facilities, and I have watched a great many families, and I have learned that the people who love someone are not always the people standing closest to them." She closed the notebook and held it out to me. "You were kind to me every single day for 3 years. Nobody told you to be. You just were." A pause. "That deserves a witness." I took the notebook from her hands. Nora looked at her watch and stood. "We have 90 minutes, she said. "Let's go over everything one more time." 10 years ago, Richard handed me a manila envelope across the dinner table at the house in Westchester and told me it was something I needed to see. It was a Sunday in November, the kind of cold, clear Sunday that makes the Hudson Valley look like a photograph of itself, and Eleanor had been gone for 8 months, and I was still in the phase of grief where I moved through rooms and sat down in chairs and ate food that people brought me without retaining much of the experience. Richard had come up from the city alone. Diane was in the Hamptons, he said, and we had eaten lunch together, and then he had taken the envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. "Paternity test," he said. "I had it done privately. I thought you should know the truth." I had looked at the results inside. Probability of paternity 0.00%. Not a match. The name on the test was Nora Calloway. The alleged father was George Calloway. The conclusion was stated in the bloodless language of laboratory science, the kind of language designed to deliver devastating information without appearing to deliver anything at all. I had put the results back in the envelope and handed it to Richard and told him to leave. He had been confused by that, genuinely confused, I think, which told me that he had expected something different. Anger at Eleanor, perhaps. A revision of the will. Some fracture in my understanding of my own family that he could exploit. What he had not expected was for me to hand the envelope back and tell him the results did not change anything. What he had not understood, what he had never understood about me or about love, or about what it means to be someone's father, was that I had known from the moment I held Nora in the hospital, 3 days old and furious about being alive, that the particular bond between a parent and a child has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with showing up. And I had shown up for Nora. Every fever, every nightmare, every school play and skinned knee and teenage argument, I had shown up. A piece of paper with a probability percentage on it did not alter a single one of those mornings. I had never told him that. I had simply handed the envelope back and told him to leave. Now sitting in the office of Dr. Susan Bennett, on the 4th floor of Manhattan General at 8:11 in the morning, with a bandaged shoulder and 48 hours of exhaustion behind my eyes, understood something about that Sunday in November that I had not understood at the time. Richard had been afraid of Nora even then. Even when he believed she was dead. Even when she had been, to the best of his knowledge, gone for 15 years. He had been afraid that somehow, in some configuration of reality he could not fully control, she would come back. And so he had built a document, a preemptive strike against a ghost, a piece of paper designed to strip away her claim before she could make one. He had been afraid of her for a decade before she walked through the door. Dr. Susan Bennett set the file on her desk and folded her hands over it, with the careful composure of a woman who had delivered 1,000 pieces of significant information in this office, and had learned to let the information do its work without theatrical assistance. She was 50 years old, Korean American, with the particular quality of authority that comes not from a title but from decades of being the person in the room who knew what to do when nobody else did. She had been Nora's mentor since Nora's 2nd year of residency, had championed her promotion to chief of trauma surgery, and had apparently been present 3 days ago when Nora requested an independent DNA comparison test under hospital supervision. "The results came back at 6 this morning," Dr. Park said. She opened the file and turned it toward us. "Probability of paternity, 99.98%. This is the standard threshold used in forensic DNA analysis. The sample was collected from Mr. Calloway under direct hospital supervision. The chain of custody was maintained throughout, and the analysis was conducted by an independent laboratory, contracted by this hospital, not by any party to this dispute." She looked at me, then at Nora, then back at me. There is no scientific ambiguity here. Nora did not react. She had known what the result would be. She had known it the way she knew her own name. I looked at the percentage on the page. 99.98. The 0.02% that remained was not doubt. It was the standard acknowledgement that no test is infinite, that science always leaves a sliver of room for the improbable, that certainty in a laboratory has the same architecture as certainty in life, almost complete and always honestly incomplete. "The earlier test," Ray said. He was sitting to my left, a position he had maintained since arriving this morning, slightly back from the table present, and quiet in the way of someone who had learned that listening was often more productive than talking. "The one from 10 years ago. What can you tell us about it?" Dr. Park had been expecting this question. Our lab director reviewed the methodology used by the testing facility listed on the original document. That facility closed in 2019, and its records were partially archived. What we were able to recover indicates that the sample submitted as the child's DNA, the sample labeled Nora Calloway, did not match the DNA profile in this hospital's records for a patient admitted under that name in the year 2000. She paused to let this land. The sample was substituted. Someone submitted a different person's DNA under Nora Calloway's name. The office was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of people who had nothing to say, but the silence of people who were letting something settle into its proper shape before they responded to it. "He substituted the sample," Nora said. Her voice was even, and her hands were flat on her knees, and she was looking at a point on the wall above Dr. Park's desk. 10 years ago, when he thought I had been dead for 15 years. She turned to look at me. He was still afraid of me. Yes, I said. Why? She asked it not like a question she wanted answered, but like a question she was turning over in her hands, examining. I was dead. He had won. Why would he? Because he knew, I said. Not that you were alive, but that he had done something that could not be undone and that the only way to keep it safe was to keep building walls around it. Another document, another layer, another piece of paper between what happened and anyone who might one day look. I stopped. The understanding of it was arriving slowly, the way large things arrive not all at once, but in sections, each one heavier than the last. He was not afraid of you. He was afraid of what he had done. And the only way to live with what you have done is to keep doing more of it so that you never have to stop and look at the first thing. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the DNA report from Dr. Park's desk and held it in both hands, looking at the percentage at the bottom of the page. 99.98. I don't need this, she said quietly. I have never needed a number on a page to know who I am or who my father is. She looked at me, and the steadiness in her eyes was the kind that comes from the other side of a very long road. But Richard does. He has always needed papers and documents and test results and signatures to tell him what is real, because he has never been able to trust what he actually feels. She set the report back down. And now he has one. And it says what it says. She stood. Ray stood with her. Dr. Park, Nora said, I need a certified copy of this report for our attorney, and I need it in the next 40 minutes. Dr. Park was already reaching for her phone. It will be ready in 20, she said. We filed out of the office into the 4th-floor corridor, the three of us moving with the particular purposefulness of people who have somewhere to be and know exactly what they are carrying with them when they get there. I was carrying Margaret's notebook under my arm. Nora was carrying 25 years of a question that had just been answered officially on 0.02% of room for doubt. Ray was carrying a warrant that was at this moment being signed by a judge in Lower Manhattan. And Richard, in a boardroom 11 blocks north of here, was carrying a smile that did not yet know what was coming. I have watched Richard walk into rooms his entire life. The first time I remember noticing the way he walked into a room, he was 7 years old and had just won a spelling bee at his elementary school in Westchester. And he came through the front door of our house on a Friday afternoon with his chest out and his chin up and the particular brightness of a child who has discovered for the first time the sensation of being looked at and found impressive. Eleanor had laughed and swept him up, and I had watched from the kitchen doorway with a feeling I did not have a name for. At the time, something warm and complicated and vaguely cautionary. The instinct of a man who had built a business by learning to read rooms, watching his son discover the same appetite. I had the name for it now. I was watching a monitor in a small room off the main corridor on the 32nd floor of the Callaway Group headquarters on 53rd Street, and on the screen in front of me, Richard was walking into the boardroom. He was wearing the charcoal suit. The good one, the one he saved for closings and shareholder meetings and moments he considered significant. His shoes caught the light from the corridor as he crossed the threshold, and he paused in the doorway for exactly the length of time a person pauses when they want the room to register their arrival before they commit to entering it. Then he walked in. Diane was a step behind him. She wore a dark green blazer and carried a leather portfolio under one arm, and she moved with the careful control of someone who had decided precisely how much confidence to display and was executing that decision with precision. not the loose confidence of someone who felt certain. The performed confidence of someone who needed to appear certain and had rehearsed it. Arthur was already in the room, seated at the far end of the table from the door, the seat with the least visibility from the entrance, the seat of someone who did not want to be noticed. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, and a folder and a laptop, and he was looking at the laptop screen with the focused attention of a man who was very carefully not looking at the door. Richard did not look at Arthur. There were 11 other people in the room, members of the Callaway Group Board of Directors ranging in age from 51 to 78, men and women I had known for years, some of them for decades, people who had watched this company grow from a two-person operation in a Queen's office to the portfolio it was today. They stood and shook hands and exchanged the quiet pleasantries of people who know something significant is about to happen and are observing the formalities, because the formalities are a way of maintaining the fiction that everything is still ordinary. Richard worked the room. He moved from person to person with the handshake and the eye contact and the small personal detail deployed at the right moment. I knew what genuine looked like in that face. I had been watching it for 45 years. This was not genuine. Beside me in the small monitoring room, Nora stood with her arms crossed and watched the screen without speaking. She had changed into clean clothes in the last hour. Someone from the hospital staff had found her a set of clean scrubs and a white coat, and the butterfly closure on her temple was the only visible evidence of the night that had just ended. She watched Richard move through the room with an expression I had come to recognize over the last 20 hours, as her assessment faced the face she put on when she was gathering information and had not yet decided what to do with it. "He thinks we're dead," she said quietly. "Yes," I said. "He's performing for an audience he believes is entirely his." "Yes." She uncrossed her arms. "How does it feel, watching him?" I considered the question honestly, because she deserved an honest answer, and because I was tired enough that dishonesty required more effort than I had available. "Empty," I said. "Not angry, not sad, empty, like looking at a place where something used to be." She did not respond to that. She understood it. I think in the particular way that children understand their parents' grief about them, not fully, because you cannot fully understand a grief you are at the center of, but enough. On the screen, Richard had reached the head of the table. He set his portfolio down, straightened his jacket, and looked out at the room with the expression of a man who believed he had already won and was now simply administering the victory. I thought about the first time he had walked into this building as an employee. He was 28 years old. I had brought him in as a junior associate in the acquisitions department, not as my son, or not only as my son, but because the 3 other people I had interviewed for the position had not been as sharp. He had earned that job. Whatever he became afterward, he had earned that first job, and I wanted to be honest about that, because dishonesty about Richard, even now, felt like a betrayal of something I owed myself. He had walked through the lobby that first morning with the same posture he had at 7 years old, after the spelling bee chest, out chin up, the appetite for being looked at running just below the surface. And I had watched him from the elevator bank, with the same complicated feeling I had watched him from the kitchen doorway 21 years before, only this time the caution in it was louder. I had not listened to the caution. I had wanted more than I wanted to be right, for the thing I was afraid of to be wrong. On the monitor, Richard opened his portfolio, removed a document, and slid it to the board member on his immediate left, then another copy to his right. The copies moved around the table with the efficiency of a process that had been choreographed, each one landing in front of a board member who accepted it with the careful neutrality of someone who was reserving judgment. Richard said something to the room. I could not hear it through the monitor. The audio feed in this room was not connected to the boardroom speaker system and oversight. I was now grateful for because watching him without sound was clarifying in a way that sound would have muddied. Without his voice, he was just a man in a charcoal suit distributing papers to people who were about to learn that the papers were built on a foundation of fabrication. He picked up a pen. He was going to sign something. I did not know what the document had moved around the table, and I could not see it clearly on the monitor, but the gesture, unmistakable. The lift of the pen, the small forward lean, the particular satisfaction in the set of his shoulders of a man who is about to make something official. The pen touched the paper. Nora put her hand on the door handle. "Ready?" she said. I looked at the monitor one last time. At my son in his charcoal suit signing a document in a room he believed was entirely his. I thought about Eleanor, about what she would have said standing here. I thought she would have said something quiet and clear and true the way she always did, something that did not require elaboration. I thought she would have put her hand on my arm the way Nora had been putting her hand on my arm for the last 20 hours, and she would have looked at me with those dark eyes that Nora had inherited, and she would have said, "It is time, George." "Ready?" I said. Nora opened the door. Before I pushed the door open, Nora stopped me. She put her hand on my shoulder, my left shoulder, the bandaged one with a gentleness precise enough to avoid the burn and firm enough to mean something, and she looked at me for a moment without speaking. It was the same gesture I had made before every significant thing she had ever done as a child. Before her first piano recital at 8 years old, when she was standing in the wings, shaking so hard I could hear her teeth. Before her SATs when she had been awake since 4 in the morning and was running on black coffee and the particular terror of a child who believes that one test can determine the shape of an entire life. Before the science fair in 7th grade, the one she won, the one where her project on thermal conductivity had beaten every other entry in the district, and she had not believed she would win until the moment they called her name. Every time I had put my hand on her shoulder, every time I had not said anything, because the things worth saying before a hard thing are usually too large for words. She had remembered. I put my hand over hers briefly, and then I pushed the door open. The room registered us before any individual person in it did. There was a collective shift, a change in the atmospheric pressure of 11 people in the middle of a meeting who suddenly understood that something had come through the door that was not supposed to be there. Conversations dropped. The board member on Richard's left looked up from the document in his hands. The woman at the center of the table, Patricia Vance, who had been on this board for 14 years and had seen more than most of them, went very still. Then Richard turned. I have been thinking about how to describe what happened to his face in that moment, and the honest answer is that I am not sure I have the right words for it. It was not simply surprise. It was the particular disruption of a man whose model of reality has just been revised without his consent, the gap between what he knew to be true and what was standing in front of him, a gap so large that his face could not decide which expression to produce, and so produced several of them simultaneously. Shock. Calculation. Something that might in a less composed man have been fear. And then the composure came back the way it always did, assembling itself across his features like a curtain being drawn. Diane did not recover as quickly. She was on her feet before she had decided to stand, which told me everything I needed to know about the state of her composure beneath the leather portfolio and the dark green blazer. Her hands came up, not reaching for anything, just up the involuntary gesture of a body that does not know what to do with itself, and then she grabbed the back of her chair with both of them gripping it, the way people grip things when they need something solid between themselves and the world. Dad. Richard said my name the way you say a word when you are testing whether it still works. carefully, with the particular caution of a man who is deciding in real time whether to continue the performance or abandon it. I did not answer him. I walked into the room. We had discussed this, Nora and I, in the 90 minutes between leaving Dr. Park's office and arriving here, and we had decided that the walk mattered. Not as theater. Theater was Richard's language, and I had no interest in speaking it. But there is a difference between a man who enters a room apologetically and a man who enters a room as though he has the right to be there, and at 75 years old, in my own company's boardroom, wearing a hospital bandage on my left shoulder and the remnants of a night that had tried to kill me, I intended to enter as the latter. I walked to the head of the table, not to Richard's end, to mine. The chair I had occupied for 31 years, the chair at the north end of the room, with the window behind it that looked out over Midtown toward the park. The chair that still had the slight adjustment to the armrests that I had requested in 2011 because my back had started giving me trouble and no one had ever changed it back because it was in ways both practical and symbolic, my chair. I stood behind it. I looked around the room at Patricia Vance, who gave me a single nod that carried 12 years of professional respect in it. At David Marchetti, who had joined the board 4 years ago and was watching this with the wide-eyed attention of a man who understood he was witnessing something that would be discussed for years. At the others, each of them processing this moment in their own way, each of them recalibrating. I looked at Arthur at the far end of the table. He was looking at his laptop. His hand was on the trackpad. I looked at Richard. "Please," I said. My voice came out the way I had hoped it would, not loud, not angry, with the particular quality of a man who has not needed to raise his voice to be heard for 40 years and does not intend to start now. "Sit down, all of you." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Patricia Vance sat. Then David Marchetti. Then one by one the others. Richard remained standing. "This is not," he started. "Richard." His name from my mouth in this room landed in a way that stopped him. Not because I put force behind it, because I did not. A name spoken without force by a father to a son in a room full of witnesses carries a particular kind of weight that force cannot replicate. "Sit down." He sat. Nora had moved to the side of the room, not to the table, but to the wall to my right, standing with her hands at her sides, and her white coat clean against the dark wood paneling, positioned in a way that made her visible to everyone in the room, without placing her at the center of it. This had also been discussed. She was not here to perform. She was here to be seen. Diane was still standing behind her chair. "Diane," I said. She sat. The room was quiet, in the way of rooms that understand something significant is occurring and have decided to give it space. Richard's jaw was working. I could see it from the length of the table, the small movement of a man grinding his back teeth, a habit he had developed in childhood, and never lost the physical expression of a mind moving very fast through a very small number of options. He was looking at Nora, then at me, then at Arthur, who was still looking at his laptop. "Whatever you think you're doing," Richard said, and his voice had recovered most of its smoothness, though not quite all of it. The way a polished surface looks after it has been quickly wiped clean enough to pass. But not what it was. This is a legally constituted board meeting. You cannot simply walk in and, "I own 51% of this company," I said. "I have owned 51% of this company since 1994. I can walk into any meeting this company holds at any time I choose." I looked at him steadily. "You know this, Richard. You have known it for 30 years. A beat." "Now," I said. I looked at Arthur. "Arthur." Arthur lifted his hand from the trackpad. The large screen at the south end of the boardroom, the one used for financial presentations and quarterly reviews, and the annual shareholder address, the screen. I had stood in front of hundreds of times over 30 years, lit up. Richard's eyes went to the screen, and for the first time all morning, the composure left his face completely, and what was underneath it was not calculation or performance or the careful management of appearances. It was the sound of his own voice. Before I reveal the shocking evidence that completely unmasks them, comment the word justice right now to let me know you are still here with me. And please note the following part contains some fictional elements and might not be entirely factual. If you prefer not to listen further, you may turn off the video right here. There is a particular kind of silence that falls when a man hears his own voice saying things he believed no one would ever hear. It is not the silence of shock exactly, though shock is part of it. It is not the silence of shame, though, that is present too for those who are capable of it. It is the silence of a specific and irreversible recognition, the moment when the private self and the public self, which a certain kind of person spends enormous energy keeping separate, are suddenly in the same room, and everyone can see both of them at once. Richard's voice came out of the boardroom speakers with a clarity that surprised even me. I had placed the device behind Eleanor's photograph 2 weeks before my admission, and I had not known when I placed it exactly what it would capture. I had known it would capture something. I had not known it would capture everything. The legal team went over everything twice. It's a clean transfer. Everything above board. You sign today, we handle the medical bills going forward, all the insurance paperwork, everything. The board members around the table went still. Patricia Vance set down the pen she had been holding. David Marchetti leaned back in his chair slowly, the way a person leans back when they are recalibrating what they thought they knew about a situation. You're in debt, Dad. You think I don't know about the Riverside development. The construction loans you personally guaranteed, you're looking at $9 million in personal liability if that project doesn't close by March. I've been covering interest payments for the last 2 quarters out of my own accounts. The man 3 seats to Patricia Vance's left, Howard Garfield, 68 years old, who had been on this board longer than anyone except me, turned and looked at Richard directly. Richard was staring at the screen. His face had achieved a stillness that I recognized not as composure, but as its opposite, the stillness of a man who has understood that movement of any kind will only make things worse, and has therefore stopped moving entirely. If you don't sign, I will contact the board Monday morning and file for a competency review. I have 2 physicians prepared to submit affidavits stating that your cognitive function is too impaired for you to manage assets of this scale. Someone at the far end of the table made a sound. Not a word. The sound a person makes when they have heard something they cannot unhear and are adjusting to the fact of its existence. The VIP package, you're on this room, this floor, the round-the-clock monitoring that runs through a Callaway Group subsidiary account. I am the majority stakeholder in that subsidiary. I will initiate a financial review of that account, and I will make sure this hospital understands that the funding is in dispute. So help me, Dad, I will let them put you out on the street before I walk away empty-handed. The recording ran for another 4 minutes. After that, Diane's voice came in twice sharp and dismissive, and then there was a pause, and then Richard's voice again, lower and more deliberate than anything that had preceded it, dropping to the register he used when he wanted to be certain he was understood. Sign it, old man. Nobody's coming to save you. Arthur reached forward and stopped the playback. The room held what it had just heard, the way a room holds smoke, not visibly, but present in every breath. Howard Garfield was the first person to speak. He was 68 years old, a retired federal judge who had joined this board as an outside director 11 years ago, and had in that time developed a reputation for saying the thing that needed to be said in the exact number of words required to say it, and no more. He looked at Richard. Richard, he said, I've known your father for 22 years. I'm going to ask you to stop talking now. Richard's mouth opened. Howard Garfield's expression did not change. Richard closed his mouth. Arthur stood. He had the folder open in front of him and the laptop connected to the room's presentation system, and he moved through the financial documentation with the efficiency of a man who had been preparing this presentation in his head for 2 years and was delivering it now with the particular satisfaction of someone whose patience has been completely vindicated. The schematics were clear. Transaction records, account numbers, the trail of the deepfake signature through the Riverside loan documentation, the AI-generated rendering of my handwriting, laid beside an authenticated sample of my actual signature, with the differences highlighted in red. Arthur explained the technology without condescension, walking the board through what machine learning signature fraud was, how it worked, what it required, and why the particular characteristics of the fraudulent signature on the Riverside documents were inconsistent with any authentic sample of my handwriting produced before or after the date of the loan application. The Riverside loan, he explained, had been submitted to a private investment fund in New Jersey. The personal guarantee bearing my fraudulent signature had been used to secure $9 million in credit. The loan existed. The money had been drawn down. The guarantee did not legally exist because the signature on it was not mine. Under 18 U.S.C. sections 1028 and 1343, Arthur said, with the calm of a man reciting facts rather than accusations, the generation and use of a fraudulent signature to obtain financial credit constitutes identity theft and wire fraud. Each count carries a potential sentence of 20 years under federal sentencing guidelines. Patricia Vance was writing something on the notepad in front of her. David Marchetti had his phone out under the table. I could see the angle of his wrist, and I suspected he was texting his attorney, which was the appropriate response of a board member who had just heard this and understood its implications for his own fiduciary responsibility. Richard stood up. "This is," he started. "Sit down, Richard," Howard Garfield said. "Not loudly. The way you say something when you do not need volume because you have authority and you know it." Richard did not sit down, but he also did not finish his sentence. "The recording was made legally," Arthur said, preempting the objection. "New York State is a one-party consent jurisdiction. Mr. Calloway was a party to the conversation. The recording is admissible in both civil and criminal proceedings." Diane had not spoken since we walked in. She was sitting very straight in her chair, her leather portfolio closed in front of her, her hands folded on top of it with the careful precision of someone who has decided that the least amount of motion is the safest amount of motion. She was looking at the table. She had been looking at the table since Arthur began speaking, and she had not looked up, and the quality of her stillness was different from Richard's. His was the stillness of a trapped animal. Hers was the stillness of someone who was doing rapid arithmetic and did not like the sum. Richard looked at Nora. Something shifted in his face, the trapped animal stillness resolving into something colder and more deliberate, the expression of a man who has run out of one kind of move and is reaching for another. He reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal jacket and produced a manila envelope. He set it on the table with a flatness that was designed to communicate finality. "Before this proceeds any further," he said, and his voice had found its smoothness again, thin but present like ice that has refrozen overnight and looks solid until you put weight on it. "There is something this board needs to know about the woman standing against that wall." He looked at Nora, then at me, then at the room. "She is not who she says she is. She is not George Calloway's daughter, and I have the documentation to prove it." He slid the envelope toward the center of the table. Nora did not move. I did not move. Arthur closed his laptop with a small, precise click, the sound of a man who had been expecting this and had already prepared for it. Richard placed the envelope on the table like a man playing his last card. He was right that it was his last card. He was wrong about what was printed on it. The envelope sat at the center of the table for a moment. No one reaching for it, no one acknowledging it, the room observing the particular etiquette of people who understand that whoever moves first gives something away. Then Howard Garfield reached out, pulled it toward him, and opened it with the deliberateness of a man who had spent 30 years on the federal bench opening documents that people hoped would end arguments and had learned that they rarely did. He read it. He set it down. He looked at Richard with an expression I could not entirely read, not disbelief, not the credulity Richard had been counting on something more considered than either. "A paternity test," Howard said, "dated 10 years ago. Conducted by an independent laboratory," Richard said, and the smoothness was fully back, now the confidence of a man who believed he had just played the move that ends the game. "The results are unambiguous. The DNA sample submitted as Nora Calloway's does not match George Calloway's profile. She has no biological claim to this estate, no standing in any proceeding related to Calloway Group assets, and no legal basis for any representation she or her attorneys may attempt to make regarding." The door opened. Richard stopped talking. Dr. Susan Bennett walked into the boardroom carrying a manila envelope of her own, certified, tabbed, the kind of envelope that hospital legal departments produce when they want no ambiguity about provenance. And she crossed the room with the particular authority of someone who has been in enough high-stakes rooms to know that the way you enter one matters. She set her envelope on the table beside Richard's. She looked at the board. "I am Dr. Susan Bennett," she said. "I am the Chief Medical Officer of Manhattan General Hospital. 3 days ago, at the request of my colleague, Dr. Nora Calloway, and with the full informed consent of Mr. George Calloway, our laboratory conducted an independent DNA comparison test. The sample collection was witnessed by 2 members of our nursing staff and 1 independent notary public. The chain of custody was maintained throughout the analysis process, which was conducted by an external forensic laboratory under contract to this hospital." She opened her envelope and removed a document, placing it flat on the table where Howard Garfield could see it clearly. "The result is a probability of paternity of 99.98%. This meets and exceeds the threshold used in federal forensic DNA standards." She looked at Richard. "Regarding the earlier test," she continued without changing her tone, which was the tone of a physician presenting findings, factual, unhurried, impervious to the temperature of the room. "Our lab director reviewed the methodology and recovered partial records from the testing facility. The facility closed in 2019. What the records indicate is that the DNA sample submitted under the name Nora Calloway in the earlier test does not match the DNA profile in our hospital's records for any patient admitted under that name. The sample was not hers." A pause, brief and precise. "Someone submitted a different person's DNA under her name." The room absorbed this. Howard Garfield looked at Richard's envelope and then at Dr. Park's envelope side by side on the table, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has just watched 2 arguments be made simultaneously and has no difficulty determining which one is built on something solid. Richard's hands came down on the table. Not a slam, something more controlled than a slam, but only just the sound of a man bringing his palms down flat on a surface because his body needs somewhere to put what his mind is producing, and the available options are narrowing. The board members nearest him shifted in their chairs. "This is fabricated," Richard said. His voice had lost the smoothness entirely now, and what was underneath it was something rawer and less practiced, the voice of a man who has been performing for so long that he has forgotten what his actual voice sounds like, and is now hearing it for the first time in a room full of people. You cannot walk in here with a document produced by a hospital that employs the woman making claims against this estate and expect this board to— Richard. Howard Garfield did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The chain of custody documentation Dr. Park has presented includes independent notarization and external laboratory certification. The same cannot be said of your document, which was produced by a facility that no longer exists and cannot be contacted for verification. He looked at Richard over the rim of his glasses with the particular patience of a man who has seen a great many people try to win arguments they had already lost. Please sit down. Richard did not sit down. He looked at Diane. And Diane, who had been sitting with her hands folded on her closed portfolio and her eyes on the table since we had walked through the door, looked up. The look between them lasted 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, I watched something pass between my children that I could not fully interpret. A negotiation conducted entirely in the language of people who have known each other all their lives and have run out of road together and both know it. Richard's eyes were asking something. Diane's eyes were answering. Her answer was no. She stood up. Her chair scraped back. Her hands were shaking visibly, the fine tremor of someone whose body has been holding something at enormous cost for a very long time and has just decided it cannot hold it anymore. Richard, she said. Her voice came out unsteady, stripped of the calculation that had been its defining quality since I had known her as an adult. Underneath the calculation was something younger and more frightened, and I thought more honest than anything she had said in years. Stop. It is over. Richard stared at her. Diane, it is over, she said again. The repetition was not emphasis. It was the sound of a person saying a true thing twice because the first time did not feel sufficient for the weight of it. Richard looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of a man encountering a betrayal he had not calculated, for which told me that in all the elaborate architecture of what they had built together, Richard had never genuinely considered the possibility that Diane might stop. He had underestimated her in the same way he had underestimated Nora. He had confused compliance with loyalty. The door opened again. 2 people in dark suits entered, a man and a woman, both carrying identification that they held up briefly for the room to see. The woman spoke. I am Special Agent Carolyn Marsh, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. My colleague is Special Agent Derek Fowler. We are here pursuant to an investigation into financial structuring violations and wire fraud under federal statutes. She looked at the table, and her eyes went directly to Diane with the precision of someone who had been briefed and knew exactly where to look. We have documentation we need to place before this board. She set a folder on the table in front of Diane. Diane looked at it. She did not open it. She did not need to. The expression on her face told me she already knew exactly what was inside. It had known probably since the moment Arthur began speaking this morning, when the careful arithmetic she had been running in her head had finally produced a sum she could no longer adjust. She sat back down. She put her hands flat on the table, and for the first time since she was 40 years old and had walked into my hospital room to take what she believed was hers, Diane Calloway looked small. I had always thought of Richard as the dangerous one. This was, I understood now, exactly what Diane had intended. Special Agent Marsh turned the folder so the board could see a financial flow diagram, color-coded and precise. Blue lines for money leaving Calloway Group accounts. Red lines arriving at 3 Delaware LLCs. Green lines moving into brokerage accounts held in those LLCs' names. 41 wire transfers over 4 years. Each one between $7,200 and $9,400, not one exceeding $10,000. Total $2,312,000. Howard Garfield looked up. Structuring, he said. Arthur corroborated every transaction, workstation credentials registered to Diane, authorization codes generated while Richard's badge data placed him outside the building. "This was not improvised," he said. I looked at Diane. She was looking at her hands. I thought about the first time she asked me for money. 24 years old, $300 for rent. I gave her $500. She paid it back in 3 weeks. Then the car repair, the down payment, the startup investment. Each amount reasonable, each explanation plausible, each one calibrating, learning exactly what I would give without question, building over 20 years of Sunday dinners, a working model of my generosity and its limits. She had never asked directly. She had never needed to. I looked at her one final time. 40 years old. Eleanor's eyes pointed somewhere Eleanor never would have recognized. The face of a stranger who had been in my house for 40 years. I turned to Arthur. He was already watching me, hand on the trackpad, waiting. I nodded. The financial diagram dissolved. A man appeared on screen, seated in a leather chair, looking directly into a camera, with the expression of someone who had decided to tell the truth and accepted the cost. The man was me. My voice came through the speakers. "My name is George Calloway. The date is August 28th, 2025. I am making this statement of my own free will because there are things that need to be said before they can be erased." Richard's head turned toward the screen, and the last thing I saw on his face was not anger, not calculation, not performance. It was the face of a man who had finally understood completely that he had lost. The man on the screen looked like me, but the weight was different. 6 weeks ago, before the hospital, before room 412, before white lilies and 63 pages, and a night that smelled like accelerant, I had sat in the leather chair in my study and looked into the camera and spoken for 47 minutes about the things I had never said out loud in the presence of another person. The board heard all of it. They heard about the fire, 25 years ago, the call from the caretaker, the drive up, alone, the girl at the base of the hill, with her arm destroyed and her voice gone. They heard about Montreal, about the private facility outside the city, the surgeries, the rehabilitation, the years of watching from a distance as Nora built a life out of materials that should have broken her. They heard about the scholarship to McGill, the residency match at Johns Hopkins, the medical journal articles I had printed and kept in a folder on my computer that was 4 gigabytes and growing. They heard about Richard and Diane not as accusations, but as the accounting of a father who had watched 2 children choose again and again the smaller version of themselves and had loved them anyway, and had finally run out of ways to protect that love from what it had become. The room was completely still for 47 minutes. When the recording ended, no one spoke. Then the door opened, and Ray Kowalski walked in. He moved to the center of the room with the quiet authority of someone who had done this before and understood that the way you conducted an arrest in a room full of witnesses mattered as much as the arrest itself. He held his credentials up briefly, identified himself and his unit, and then he looked at Richard and Diane with the expression of a man who felt no satisfaction in this moment, and no hesitation either. "Richard Calloway," he said. "Diane Calloway, you are both under arrest." He read the charges in the flat procedural language of someone reciting a legal document, which is what it was. Arson in the 1st-degree conspiracy, and attempted murder in the 2nd degree for Richard. Financial structuring, wire fraud, and conspiracy for Diane. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Diane stood before he finished reading. She walked around the table toward me, and her face had come apart in the way faces come apart when the last defense has been removed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely the way a structure fails when the load-bearing element goes. She was crying before she reached me, the tears coming in the silent, uncontrolled way of someone who has not cried in so long that their body has forgotten how to do it with any grace. She reached for my hand. I looked at her fingers on my sleeve, at the face of my daughter, 40 years old, undone. I closed my eyes. I turned away. Behind me, I heard the sound of handcuffs, 2 sets, the metallic click of something closing that does not open easily. I heard Richard's breathing change the sharp, involuntary intake of a man whose body has just understood something his mind was still refusing. I did not turn around. Then Richard spoke. One word, my name, the way you say a word, when it is the last thing you have left, and you know it will not be enough, and you say it anyway because silence is worse. Dad. I stood at the window and looked out over Midtown Manhattan, the towers, the water tanks, the October sky going pale and clear above it all, and I kept my eyes there until I heard the door open and close and the room settle into the particular quiet of a space from which something has just been permanently removed. Nora put her hand in mine. We stood there together without speaking, and outside the window the city moved the way cities move, indifferent and continuous and alive, and I thought about Eleanor and about the girl at the base of the hill, and about the 47 minutes of truth I had spoken into a camera 6 weeks ago, because I had known in the way old men know things that the time for keeping it private had passed. I had been right about that. I had been right about that. And I had been wrong about so many other things. And the window in front of me held both of those facts in its reflection without judgment. After the handcuffs clicked and the room emptied, I sat in my chair for a long time. Not because I was tired, because I needed to feel what it was like to be in a room where no one was lying. The board voted unanimously. Patricia Vance called it. Howard Garfield seconded without hesitation. The motion restored full executive authority to George Calloway, effective immediately pending legal resolution of all outstanding matters. 12 hands, 12 votes. 31 years of this company returned in 40 seconds. Arthur shook my hand at the door. He held it a beat longer than necessary, the way people hold things they are relieved to finally set down, and then he nodded once and walked toward the elevator without looking back. That was Arthur. He had waited 2 years for this morning. He did not need ceremony. Margaret was standing in the lobby when we came out. She had her coat on and her thermos in her hand, and she was watching the elevator doors with the focused attention of someone who has been waiting and intends to keep waiting for however long it takes. When she saw us, she did not say anything. She walked to me and put both arms around me briefly, firmly, the embrace of a woman who has spent 40 years caring for people and knows the difference between comfort and performance. Outside, October, sunlight hit the sidewalk on 53rd Street at an angle that made everything look briefly clarified. The buildings, the taxis, a woman walking a dog, the ordinary, irreplaceable texture of a city going about its morning. I looked at Nora standing beside me in the light. 25 years. Every photograph I had kept, every article, every journal entry, every morning I had watched from a distance, none of it had prepared me for what it looked like to simply stand next to my daughter in the daylight and have nowhere to hide from how grateful I was. In the car, she asked where I wanted to go. Home, I said. I want to go home. She nodded. She did not ask which one. She already knew. In December, we sat together in the garden of the old house, Nora beside me. The winter sun warm and unhurried across the flagstones, and I thought about everything it had taken to get to that chair. I kept too many secrets for too long. I told myself it was protection. It was not. It was fear wearing the coat of love. Do not make my mistake. The people who deserve your truth are the ones who will carry it carefully, find them and trust them before the darkness forces your hand. I believe God gives us second chances, not because we deserve them, but because someone who loves us asked him to. Eleanor asked. I am certain of it. These grandpa stories are never just stories. Every family story carries a warning and a gift inside the same envelope. You choose which one to open first. The grandpa stories I carry now are different from the ones I carried a year ago. They are heavier, and they are cleaner, and I would not trade them. If this family story reached something in you, a memory, a person, you have been meaning to call a truth, you have been meaning to speak, do not let this moment pass quietly. Leave it in the comments. Share it with someone who needs it. And if these grandpa stories are the kind you want to stay close to, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. One last thing, the stories ahead contain fictional elements built for reflection and the heart. If that is not the journey you are looking for, no hard feelings. Choose what feeds you. But if you stay, I promise to make it worth your time.